connecting. You're in the box.
I'm going to use my 18 minutes in a slightly different way, partly because I have a very specific connection not only to TED but to Belgium. I was the first TED speaker in 1984 and spoke at the subsequent 13 TED meetings and felt very at home. And then Chris Anderson bought it and the old regime stopped being part of it and just went back periodically. And in the case of Belgium, my family was at least married Belgians, and my uncle was the Belgian ambassador to London, Mexico, and the United Nations. So Belgium always played a big part in my life. So I'm here this morning with these sort of two pieces, but with an agenda that has something else to it. And that is one laptop per child is something I've spent the past 5 years talking about all over the world, working very hard to roll it out, in some cases against all odds. And something's changed in the past 6 months. And in the past 6 months, it's more or less accepted. It got traction. It went over a threshold, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So now I can talk about it slightly differently because I'm no longer in the business of selling laptops, but I'm in the business of development through education and through a very particular kind of education, primary education. And the reason we chose primary, and we've been doing this for a long time, is that if you mess up primary education, then all subsequent education really suffers, and very often you can't recover. Then when you look at the world at large, there are in rough numbers 2.2 billion children. Of those, 1.2 billion fall in the sweet spot of primary education, and of those, roughly half do not get what you and I would call an education. Now, that number is quite big. It's 500 million. The truth is only about 100 million literally get nothing. And by that I mean they don't even go to the first grade. People might argue it's a little lower, but it really isn't. So when you look at the landscape, you say to yourself, how am I going to fix that? And I'm going to pick one country, and it's the country of Afghanistan. My statistics are about a year old. But in Afghanistan, 25% of the teachers are illiterate. The next 25% of the teachers have a 1-grade advance on the children who they are teaching. 50% of the children don't go to school, and 75% of the girls don't go to school. So when you look at a situation like that, you say, now how do we in any way fix that? And the answer cannot be that what we're going to do is simply train teachers and build schools. Because if that's all you're going to do, it's first of all, it's going to take a very, very long time. And second of all, it's something that assumes a great deal about teaching and school and how it's going to work and how you're going to roll it out. So don't stop doing that, but there might be something else. And this was the key to one laptop per child 5, 6 years ago when it officially got started. And the key is leverage children. In other words, think about children slightly differently, because most of us think about children, including our own children, as the recipients of an education, which typically happens in school, but what you are receiving is a body of knowledge and maybe some methods and techniques that we will impart in this place called school, and then that, as you grow up, will serve you well, and it has served everybody in this room very, very well. But there's another way of looking at it, and that is to look at children as the agents of change. Can we not just leverage them in their own education and leverage them in the sense of having them participate in their own learning, but also have them be, for example, and I'll show you some examples in a moment, in Peru, roughly 50% of the children who are involved with one laptop per child are teaching their parents how to read and write. Now, if that doesn't put goosebumps on your goosebumps, I have nothing to tell you. Okay. But the point is, it's a very different view. And that's what I'd like to stress, particularly at this time that it's gotten traction. Now, let's see if I can get this to work. So pushing the center button doesn't do it. Pushing the right button, point it to that. Okay, point it to that. Aha, okay. Thank you. I go back to 1982 because it was our first attempt to the use of computers in developing nations, in this case outside of Dakar, Senegal. And it was way ahead of its time, but we learned that those children, that particular child, spoke neither French nor English, but spoke Wolof and played that keyboard like a piano. So one of the most common things people told me back in the early 2000s, you can't give a child a laptop and just walk away. Well, you know what? You can. It's not the preferred way of doing it, but we have given children in the jungles of Africa and the deserts of Asia closed boxes and walked away. And within a very short period of time, they're up and running, and the kids all work together. And it's a little bit like a project you may have heard of called The Hole in the Wall, but this is done where it's one laptop per child, and it actually does work, and that was the beginning of it. In 2001, I became involved in Cambodia, and the reason I show this photograph is it was sort of the inception of one laptop per child, because as I looked at that picture, which you can see a satellite dish in the background, it was clear that normal market forces would do certain things. And when I wake up in the morning, I ask myself one question, and that one question is, will normal market forces do what I am doing today? And if the answer is yes, then the answer from my point of view is stop doing it. The only thing that one laptop per child and Nicholas Negroponte and the people who work with me should be doing are the things that normal market forces won't do. And in that picture, in 2001, I could tell you, speak for hours, the one thing that normal market forces wouldn't do was break the spell of the laptop. That laptop, like all laptops, was the consequence of a little funny game. I used to joke about it in the early 1980s, that Intel would make a faster processor and Microsoft would use more of it, and Intel would make a faster processor and Microsoft would use more of it. And the consequence is that all laptops, certainly in 2001, were SUVs, in the sense that you were using more fuel to move the car than the passenger. And these were just fat, obese laptops. The fat lady can't sing. Those laptops took forever to power up, forever to power down, and it was just getting worse and worse. I spent a few days ago loading Windows 7 on my machine. It's no better. It's the same junk. Okay? And sort of it's... So the question is, how do we break that spell? How do you break the spell? And you break the spell by having some credibility, by being a nonprofit, by having MIT behind you. And we said, okay, let's make a laptop that really is stripped down, is very fast, is very simple, and, by the way, it's child-centric. Breaks my heart to go to an African village and see kids using used computers with a generator in the back of the school in a village that you have to walk the last 5 miles to get to, and you say, bravo, this entrepreneurship, until you look at what the kids are doing. And 6-year-old kids, 7-year-old kids are being taught PowerPoint, Excel, and Word. That's criminal. Okay. These children are not office workers. They should be making things. They should be making music. They should be communicating with each other. They should be writing computer programs. They should be exploring. They should be doing all sorts of things, not making PowerPoints. So we took the step, and today, 2009, I'll show you some statistics in a moment. There's perhaps not as many as I would have hoped, but there are 1.3 million in the hands of kids, 31 countries, 19 languages. The 31 countries are interesting because they include Afghanistan, Haiti, Gaza, Mongolia, Ethiopia, Rwanda, places that we feel the humanitarian mission is important, and normal market forces wouldn't go there. So I'm going to take you through, and since so much is out there, is use some of the images to just make comments on this and then sort of take a position at the end. This is in Peru, and the reason I like this picture, aside from it being a very good picture, is it was one of the first instances where the child really was teaching his parents and grandparents how to read and write. What that does to the esteem of the child, what it does to the parent-child relationship in a positive sense is absolutely extraordinary. And Peru is a leader in that regard. This is a child in India. It's a different kind of relation. It's a child who doesn't go to school. It's a child who's using this as a school in the box. I don't advocate this as the right way to do it in the sense that, yes, school would, particularly as a social experience, is important, but there are many children who don't go to school, and this is their lifeline. These kids sleep with those laptops. Those laptops become their pillows, they polish them, and in Cambodia, when we put the laptops in the first year, there were only a few hundred. One broke in 3 years. These kids treat them very, very different. This is not government property in a computer lab, because when you build a computer lab, the computers last at most 3 months. This is a picture in India, and I bring it up to remind myself something very important. This teacher had never been involved with computers. His classroom was in perfect lines. The kids stood at attention. He held not a whip, but like something like a fly swatter in his hand. And if those kids moved, there was a kind of swat, and they're perfectly lined up, and boom, this is the way he teaches now. The kids run to school. The parents are involved. Discipline problems drop. And it's just all over the place, wherever we go. This is what's happening. Truancy, it's a fancy English word, but it's for sort of not going to school. Truancy is as high as 45% in the villages that we go to. And once we start the program, it literally drops to 0. If truancy can go from 0 to 45%, I don't need to give you other statistics about whether it works or not. This is in Colombia. And the reason I put Colombia is that our partner in Colombia is the Minister of Defense, because all of the laptops we've installed, or almost all of them, are in the FARC region. And the FARC region is the terrorists who have locked off that region for 30 or 40 years, and those children had no radio, no television, no nothing, no communication with the outside world. And that's very important, because poverty is one thing. It's absolutely critical. And I've always said the mission of one laptop per child is to eliminate poverty, which is grand goal and so on. And you can take me to task on that. But I found in the process of doing that, isolation is something else. If we could end isolation, and these kids were isolated. And when you're isolated, you have no points of view, and you're really susceptible, and this is one of the reasons that a lot of fundamentalism, a lot of terrorism comes from very isolated places. This is in Peru is one of our trophies. Peru, the president of Peru has put the laptops in the villages. The villages are villages where they don't speak Spanish, they speak native languages, and it's, again, completely changed the way education works in those villages. And as I mentioned, the children teach the teachers, teach their parents. Now, this is Uruguay, and I'm very proud of Uruguay. It's not a huge country. It only has 500,000 children, but every single child in Uruguay has a laptop. 3 weeks ago, the president of Uruguay handed the last child a laptop, and it has transformed the country. In this classroom, the teacher who's of that classroom heard, because the president announced it as his legacy, heard that the laptops were coming, and so the teacher who had been teaching for 30 years went to the Social Security office and said, I want early retirement. She came back, and they said, yes, come back in 3 weeks. She came back to class, and in the intervening period, the laptops arrived, and of course, she and her classmates opened them, they all opened them, they started using them, and within 2 days, she went back to the Social Security office and said, I want late retirement. And she has been teaching very, very happily. The teachers love it. The energy in the classroom. Now, we don't focus on the classroom because you're in the classroom, if you're lucky, 13 or 14 hours a week. So even if the classroom experience is perfect, it's a very small slice of a child's life. So you want them to take them home. We make that a requirement. The kids take them home. They use them. They use music. And then they start sort of having an influence on the village and village life. Now, Uruguay is so important, they put, or to us, and we, I guess, are important to them, they put us on a postage stamp. So I feel very good about that. If you could make it onto a postage stamp, maybe that's a measure of being absorbed into the culture. This is Rwanda. Rwanda is the trophy in Africa. It's not a great picture. You might see President Kagame in the distance there. Rwanda is important because President Kagame is spending 20% of his education budget on laptops, and he will do every child in that country, which is 2.2 million children, within the next 2 years. That's a level of commitment that is absolutely incredible, and as a consequence, we've moved our entire education group to Rwanda. If you want to visit our education group, you no longer come to Cambridge or Brussels, you go to Rwanda, and as a consequence, working out of there in Mali, Ethiopia, Cameroon at the moment. I will snap through this very quickly for those of you who haven't seen it, not because it's, again, a laptop story, but one of the things we did technically is build something that had properties that were very important. It's an electronic book. We announced 1.6 million books are available on this laptop free. How many people have it? They've been available for 2 weeks, and what we also do is we put 100 books on each laptop when we ship them into a village, and if you ship 100 books on the laptop into a village, each laptop has 100 different books. So that's 10,000 books in the village without telecommunications and so on. I'm coming to the end. People smile when the little ears go up because it's a telecommunications system and it doesn't need cell phones to connect them, and then you use a satellite base station, which you can, for 30 cents per child per month, you can connect the village. It's very, very inexpensive. And I'll make one last remark, because I'm over and I'm stopping, is about the cost of ownership. This summer, Microsoft issued a statement that the cost of ownership of our laptop was $230 per year. Now, that is somewhere between ignorance and cynical. And it turns out that the cost of ownership of the laptop, including purchase, is $1 per week. And we now know these numbers because we have the 1.2 million out. We have some countries that are completely saturated. So it's within grasp. Measurement is a word I put on there because people ask me, can I prove this works, and how about doing a pilot project to see it? You don't do pilot projects for electricity. If you really think you've got to pilot electricity to see if it works, you're in trouble. And this is in the same category. Some people say, well, you were so hyperbolic and you said you were going to do 100 million laptops in 5 years. Well, guess what? We did. These don't happen to be our laptops. Because of that laptop, the netbook industry got created. It's going to represent 30% of the world market by the end of next month. So it's as if I stood here on stage 5 years ago and said to you, I'm doing an electric car. And then stand on it today and say, guess what, ladies and gentlemen, 1/3 of all cars made today are electric. So 1/3 of all laptops fit that category. How many are going to children at the moment in developing nations isn't a big number. Do they have the properties that make them child-centric? Not yet. My last comment on creativity is that I have believed, and I'd be interested in what some of the later speakers believed, that to go through the stages of economic development, to get from poverty to some form of wealth, that you had to do this with discipline and lockstep obedience. You had to do it the way Lee Kuan Yew turned Singapore. You had to do it in ways that were incompatible with a creative society, that everybody had to be disciplined and no nail could stick up and no sort of complexity and contradiction. Well, that seems to be changing. And that with this laptop, we are noticing that kids in remote parts of Africa are being extraordinarily creative. And I can go on and on. I've exceeded my time already, but maybe in discussion later, as I'll be here the whole day, is can a developing nation be creative and develop at the same time? And I think the answer is now yes. Thank you very much.